So hey, Aidan, what was gaming's greatest year?
Gaming's greatest year, 1995. Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, of course. Well, very close. This magazine is more intelligent than you, Aidan, because they picked 1996. You've got FunFactor, two old gamers reviewing old video game magazine reviews. I'm Ty Shelter, he's Aidan Moher, and we're two professional writers who grew up loving the video games and video game magazines of the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Every episode, we take a critical look back on the games media that, for better and for worse, inspired us to do what we do. First, go to funfactorpod.com and follow the show on your podcatcher of choice. Leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your media. We'll read the best, kindest, funniest, and most insightful ones on the air in our letters section. Please consider becoming a member of FunFactor Ultra, our premium tiers that unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and the members-only channels of our Discord. Just go to funfactorpod.com and I promise you can't miss it. Then, help us spread the word. Shout us out on Blue Sky at funfactorpod.com or anywhere else at FunFactorPod. Aidan, it's been a lot of news in the news about print magazines, the specialty of our show, digital media, the past of which, the future of which, are all colliding. We launched our podcast the day that Game Informer announced they were coming back, both as a digital and a print media magazine. We've guested on people who've talked about print magazines. A good friend of the show, Darren Hupke, has a retro game zine project I was proud to back, and I know you've contributed to that collection. Can't wait to see those magazines in print, hold them in my hands. I wanted to talk a bit about that today, Aidan, the divide between digital and print media, and what would it mean to have new games magazines today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, print media, games media is so important to both of us. But I've also found myself in recent years trying to integrate it back into my life a little bit. There's not a lot out there, but, I picked up a print subscription for Wired magazine. I'm supporting Nintendo Force on Patreon, and I get a physical paper magazine from them regularly. There's, stuff like Profound Waste of Time, Darren's work on his retro zine, like where I can tangibly sit and read something, and that changes my experience so much that I think it's something we're really missing. For me personally, when I'm sitting there reading, it never feels like work in the way that like engaging with any online media where it feels, like work in a weird way, because I always feel like, oh, how can I use this? Do I need to have a take on this? Like, should I share that or should I not? I'm not really just consuming it for myself. And that to me is the big difference when I sit down with an issue of Nintendo Force and like read through their previews and their reviews, because it's not written in a way that's trying to generate clicks at that very second. Right? The lifespan of online digital media is so short because it only cares about like intense short-term results. Reading a feature in Wired is not that. It wants to persevere. It wants to be something that has a long tail and just exists as itself. It's not in reference to a whole bunch of other things that you're going to have to click through. It's not trying to keep you on the computer or in your web browser or on that website for as long as humanly possible.
Yeah, and that feeds right into, I was trying to think like what would a periodical in today's, monthly periodical in today's environment mean? Obviously news doesn't really, track. It's something I said for years about newspapers. I'm like, the idea that people are going to pay money for a printed version of literally yesterday's news just doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. So I don't think news as such can fit in a magazine, but previews, if you get long enough advance time, right, to be able to print out and stuff, that makes a ton of sense. Reviews, obviously, you can review anything. You and I can sit here, we're reviewing these old magazine reviews. We could just as easily play the games and review the games. And many people have gone back and played games that they were not alive when they were released, right?
Yeah, and review them like through a lens of like cultural criticism, not trying to, again, like the previous episode where we talked about Game Fan, we talked a lot about, the idea of consumer style criticism versus arts criticism. And we can look at these and talk about these games in a way that is like cultural criticism that looks at them and their impact on the world, not as a product that needs to sell.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Something that we've been talking about Again, with so many websites being shut down and publications being just decimated or hollowed out and reduced to just content shells or just guides places, really stepping back and going, let's do this art as art. Let's look at this media as media, and let's evaluate video games as standalone cultural objects and just completely divorce it from this is it worth the money aspect. I think that's something that magazines can do really, really well. And I think there are reviews that could stand alongside film reviews. Like get those writers, give them that time and that space, and then give them that permanence. Because Teen Me would slap myself for even suggesting this. But there is still something about holding physical media in your hands. There is still that remove. I think, I've never been and I will never be reading on the internet is not really reading, or, reading on your phone is like not really reading. Like, yes, it's still really reading. So I'm never going to be a snob about walking into a used bookstore and like, this is, the archives, the smell. Like, I like those things, but I don't fetishize it. I don't put it up above reading great articles or great books on a screen. But I do think there is something physical.
Yeah. I mean, like, we live in a physical world, and there is something where you're connecting multiple senses to a single piece of, whatever it is you're consuming, that I think is really important. And you just don't get that as much through, digital reading. My whole career is based off like writing online. So I obviously think it has immense value, but I think that there is something in our brain when we're holding something in our hands and engaging with it deeply that just changes the way that we experience that. And I think, like, coming back to the idea of like, what would a magazine or a periodical look like now? Well, they exist and they're out there and they're great. Like we've said, Nintendo Force, profound waste of time. There's lots of good examples of this. Sasha's Retro Bytes does a great fanzine called Scanlines that I love. We again bringing up Darren's work. Their books, Retro Game Books puts out fabulous books. There's so many like examples of how we can put out physical print media about video games that works. It's more about how do we connect it with readers at a scale that allows it to like support itself, not necessarily grow. But when there's such a lack of infrastructure for actually creating these at a sustainable cost so that people can make them, that's, I think, where things get a little harder. But I think it was Josh Rivera on Blue Sky was saying like, hey, if people are looking at, making, new games media, like, understand that you need to approach it as a part of culture, write about it as culture, and get it into the hands of people who read about culture, not just stuff for video game fans, but write criticism and write features and interviews that somebody who loves movies and books and film, I said movies, but film, music, books, theater, writing, like, I read about all those things because I like all of those things. We need to do the same with games. And don't segregate it so much. Make culture magazines that include and respect games as culture. And I think that's an important step forward. Getting beyond the idea that any coverage of video games has to eventually lead to this endpoint of selling video games. Whether that's because, sites like Polygon, they put out great games criticism, but at the end of the day, they're supported by, ad sales from companies that want to sell video games. And so how do we break out past that? And that's where worker-owned sites and journalism and stuff comes into play. But we'll see, what that looks like, what that shapes out to over time.
Well, for this week's episode, Ziff-Davis Publishing is 29 years ahead of its time in getting digital content into print. Because we're looking at Intelligent Gamer Magazine #2, which was literally a college kid with a website that they hired and gave him a magazine. It is time to open the cover of Intelligent Gamer. I'm very excited to do this. Before we get there, if you're not already a member of FunFactor Ultra, getting ad-free episodes, hang tight through the break. When we come back, we will flip through Intelligent Gamer #2. and their review of Jumping Flash 2. Welcome back to FunFactor, where two old gamers review old video game magazine reviews. Of course, we want you to review us. Do we get a full 5.0 in FunFactor? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or a comment on YouTube, and we'll read the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining ones on the air. Aidan, it's July 1996. The cover of the second ever issue of Intelligent Gamer declares we are in the middle of gaming's greatest year. The PlayStation and Saturn are not just out, but already maturing consoles with some of the biggest games they would ever see previewed in this issue. Nintendo 64 launched in Japan within like a week of when this issue shipped, and their coverage fresh from E3. It's right here in this issue. Intelligent Gamer is rising with the dawn of this glorious new era, and Aidan, knowing what you know about me and my teenage drive to feel like I am grown and smart and cool, what do you think I thought about Intelligent Gamer?
I think you probably thought it made you look smart and cool. And it probably did.
No! Fuck that.
But you liked next gen.
I am almost 15 years old, Aidan. I know I'm an intelligent gamer. Do not pander to me.
Fair.
This magazine, Intelligent Gamer, is clearly for smart 13-year-olds who wish they were as smart as me. Or maybe 15-year-olds who think they're intelligent, but not as intelligent as me, who is actually intelligent. Right.
You should have been writing for Intelligent Gamer.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Fair enough.
Correct.
Yeah. What
Intelligent Gamer. Come on. What I did not know, could not have known, really, is that Intelligent Gamer was, in fact, way ahead of its time. In the summer of 95, Ziff-Davis relaunched Electronic Games Magazine as Fusion, trying to create a multimedia magazine that covered movies, TV, and geeky entertainment in general. I'm going to drop this into the doc here. I've already got it. You'll see it if you're watching on YouTube, the visual version here. But Aidan, here in the document, can you see now this cover? Fusion, the magazine of interactive entertainment. This is so sick. 90s in so many ways.
Yeah, that's really cool.
We've got this like retro future, like remember the 50s kind of the Fusion logo itself.
It looks like a Nintendo, like a one of those weird Nintendo ads from that time.
Yes.
Where like like Yoshi's making people explode and stuff, but
yeah, we've got a guy with like retro future goggles.
Yeah.
To say sensory overload, and like
you got Waterworld in there, X-Band.
Yes, there's Waterworld.
Judge Dredd.
Is the 3DO on
so
thin
good.
ice? And this retro future man screaming with his eye goggles, barely able to take in his rocket ship trip through fat pipe cyberspace. Sensory overload. Oh my gosh. Unfortunately, there was also an overload of just sort of general entertainment magazines pitched toward geeks at the time.
Yeah.
So pivoting away from video games meant pivoting from being a medium fish in a small pond to a tiny fish in a gigantic one. So after a year, they pivoted back to video games and made the actually futuristic, actually bold decision to hire Jeremy Jer Horowitz. Aidan, can you read for me these excerpts of a post that Jer Horowitz made to the Usenet group rec.games.video.nintendo on April 8th, 1995?
We're very proud to announce the official WWW opening for the first complete online video games magazine, Intelligent Gamer Online. For the longest time, people on the internet have been saying what a great idea it would be if a bunch of the net's game reviewers and news sources could get together and work on a project in tandem. Well, it happened, starting back in January. Our temporary address is http://igonline.escape.com. And though it might take a while for your www surfer to locate the address, it should indeed find it. Escape's server and T1 line have been fritzing for a couple of days, so if you don't connect quickly, try again. We'll be at www.igonline.com within a month, so keep the address handy if you like what you see. The main goal of Intelligent Gamer Online is to offer gamers an articulate alternative to what's already out there. Please give our pages a solid looking over, and when you're done, leave us comments so we can improve our upcoming issues.
Incredible.
I absolutely adore the fact that they launched on like their dev server before they could get the DNS switch to like go through their www site. So good. Brilliant. Sign of the times too. And I also love that, like, quote unquote, for the longest time people on the internet have been saying, like, it's 1995, man.
Oh yeah.
Like, it hasn't been that long.
Oh yeah.
Pretty cool stuff. I like it.
I do too. Horowitz had been running Intelligent Gamer as a Prodigy site. If you were on the walled garden that was Prodigy, he brought it onto the capital W web, and again, it was with capital W in that post, that Usenet post as well, in the spring of '95, running it as a bi-weekly online magazine. Other magazines and writers had web presences at the time, as we've discussed, but if this wasn't the first major web-only gaming mag, it was certainly very early and did grow a relatively big following. About a year later, Sendai Publishing, a Ziff-Davis imprint, buys Intelligent Gamer Online, gives Horowitz the reins of Fusion, and they rename Fusion Intelligent Gamers Fusion. This lasts like 2 months before they throw out Fusion and we get Intelligent Gamer #1, a Ziff-Davis magazine with the sole branding dreamt up by its acqui-hired editor-in-chief, who, according to his LinkedIn and resume, was a senior at the University at Buffalo at the time. This lasts for 8 issues.
Hey. Hey, we're only on episode 7. We can't judge yet.
No. But hey, so Horowitz pursues his MBA, goes to Cornell for law school while still freelancing for Ziff-Davis and other major outlets. He edits the Cornell Law Review, graduates cum laude, all while developing like a serious foodie thing, apparently, because he then launches Buffalo Chow, a hyper-local restaurant review site, and iLounge, a national, global sort of Apple ecosystem news review and lifestyle magazine for Apple products. He ends up opening a 120-seat tapas joint in Buffalo while working as a senior editor for 9to5mac.com. In 2017, he inevitably moves to California, where Apple and food is, as opposed to Buffalo, New York. Then he at first writes for VentureBeat and GamesBeat. In 2021, joins Allison Worldwide, a PR firm, to create, quote, executive thought leadership content. He then jumps to Adobe, spends 2 years full-time at Adobe, creating more executive thought leadership content focused on cloud and AI stuff. At the time of this recording, is back at Allison with a more senior title. But in case you're worried, he got lazy in his old age, approaching and probably right about 50, thinking he gave up the multi-class freelancer dabbler life. No, in 2024 he launched OC Alpha, a trusted guide to Orange County, California's best dining, art, shopping, and attractions. This guy's career is just like mine, except way better across the board. 15-year-old me has been utterly served. Jer Horowitz was always the more intelligent gamer.
That's a pretty impressive resume. Like,
genuinely,
yeah, like
it's a lot.
And that's one of the things that stands out from a lot of these like masthead read-throughs that we do, is like there are people on these mastheads that go on to do impressive things. I'm looking through the rest of the masthead and I'm seeing like, senior editor for Intelligent Gamers, John Ricciardi, who, now works at 8.4 and has forever and has probably translated and localized a bunch of your favorite video games from Fire Emblem to Xenoblade. I'm looking further through. Mark McDonald is in there, who I know from EGM and 1UP, but is now working on stuff like Tetris Effect and a bunch of big games. Chris Johnston, who's a friend of the show, somebody who I've always admired. Like, there are some pretty impressive names in there. There's also one interesting name right at the end of the contributing editors section that I'm curious about. Mr. David Rubin. And I wonder, If that's the same, if that's Dave Rubin, a right-wing political commentary person who came from sort of an entertainment background. Nothing on Wikipedia, but he's the right age. It's interesting too.
Yeah, there's one I want to point out here that we'll get to later. Foreign correspondent Akira Kishimoto. I cannot find an Akira Kishimoto. However, looking through issues of Intelligent Gamer, I noticed, and we'll get to it, there is a lot of Japanese coverage and a lot of quality Japanese coverage that, at least in my opinion, doesn't, fetishize or otherize it as much, right? It's still, of course, talked a lot about this is what it's like in Japan. We don't get all these games. Why don't they localize our games, et cetera, but it definitely reports on, hey, like, and there's a spread in this, we'll get to it, like a report from Akihabara. Hey, this is how people buy games in Japan, right? And I absolutely cannot find any proof that this person exists or wrote in any other website or anything. So yeah. I'm gonna keep poking around at that because this was an era where there were some white writers who pretended to be Japanese. I'm thinking of a Marvel Comics editor who fully created a Japanese person from whole cloth and just pretended they had a Japanese person on staff to kind of dodge questions of authenticity. So it's just interesting. I'm not saying, if Akira Kishimoto is listening to this, I apologize for throwing shade on you in any sort of way. But I can't tie this to anything. And of course, the search results are all goofed up because Kishimoto is the surname of a great manga artist, and then Akira is the manga and anime, and then a bunch of people have taken one name or the other for their forum handles and whatnot. So it may just be that the well is so poisoned I'll never be able to tease it out. But the end result is Intelligent Gamer had some ahead of the curve coverage of Japanese games and gaming. Very cool. Aidan, do you notice something about just this editorial page here? We got the letter to the editor, we got the masthead, we got the logo, we got the layout. Anything ring a bell?
Anything ring a bell?
Does it look familiar in any way to you?
I mean, it looks pretty Ziff-Davis-y to me for that era, but I'm not. I don't know what you're. I don't know what you're throwing down here.
This is next gen. Like, this is next generation. The font, it's the same font. Like the main font. I think I was looking back and forth. I think the weighting or kerning might be a little bit different, but I was a huge next generation fiend, and when I saw this on the news shelves, I was like, wow. This is the same font as Next Gen. And if you skip ahead a couple pages, get to the letters section, same thing. Again, it's the same font. And the editor's responses are in blue to the letters that are in black, which again is exactly the same as Next Generation. And I had a whole moment reading this first letter. There's layers to this. Okay? But first, let's do the flip through. So, Aidan, there's layers to this, right? I'm having a moment with this first letter from your countryman, Kwang Su. Read this for me, and I think you and this letter writer share another very important aspect of your personality.
Okay, so the letter is titled, I Want My Hand-Drawn Graphics, and they say, Intelligent Gamer. Way back when polygon rendered, motion captured, and digitized graphics appeared, I thought that they were really cool. Today, I pine for the days of hand-drawn graphics. That's right. Good old, two-dimensional, some human, not a computer, drew it graphics. What really irks me about the so-called, quote-unquote, new generation of games is that their graphics aren't really new, and neither is their gameplay, but that's another letter. I mean, look at Loaded. The graphics in that game are poor. The moment you zoom in, the picture gets completely blocky. It's like I'm playing with my Commodore 64, not to be confused with the Nintendo 64. Let's face it, polygons don't work too well for many types of games. Certainly, they're about the only choice for driving games. But why are so many action games using those awful polygons? Rendered graphics are also pretty sad. Donkey Kong Country was great the first time around, and then the graphics got boring. There was no personality in them at all. Personally, I think that hand-drawn graphics convey way more style and flair than any polygon or rendered art. I just thought I'd vent that out. Perhaps titles like Virtua Fighter 3 and KI2, Killer Instinct 2.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell. I thought it was K12.
I thought so too. It took
Killer
me a second.
Instinct 2 are going to change my mind, but right now I'm going to be cynical. Kwasu, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. You know, you say we might have something in common, the two of us being both from Canada. This was actually my alter ego in 1996. When I wanted to appear like I had authentic opinions about Japanese games, I gave myself a non-Japanese name and presented myself now. I mean, you know how I feel about this era of polygon graphics. I think that there was the same way we're seeing, you know, remember the push to 3D TVs a few years ago where nobody really like needed it. But it was like they're constantly having to push new tech forward. And there's sort of that kind of capitalistic, push for new adoption of new tech so that people are spending money on new things. And I think like 3D graphics were obviously necessary at some point for video games, but you know, it came with so many compromises in the mid 90s. And like I've said, I've never really been a fan of them. Now that said, we could never have got Wave Race 64, for instance, without polygonal graphics and stuff. So like it did open up new opportunities for new game design and new gameplay experiences that never could have happened if we hadn't made that transition at that time. But it's very rare that I go back to those games and think they look good or hold up well.
I agree with you. I didn't agree with you at the time, partially because I got the PlayStation early, right? And so I was in love with it. I wanted more of it. But obviously, if you'd asked me at the time, you know, what's a more mature art style, what's a more mature graphical style, you know, what looks better overall, I would still tell you, you know, the best 2D pixel games look better than, you know, even most of the best 3D games at the time. That's kind of what the editor replies. Relative to hand-drawn artwork, rendered and polygonal artwork are still in their infancy. Most 3D artists today attempt to create realistic renditions of what exists or 2D versions of previously 2D cartoon artwork. Few 3D game artists have attempted to be Picassos, Dalis, or Eschers, as it's far easier within large game companies to be a Michelangelo or a Tex Avery. Give the industry some time to catch up to the new technology. And Aidan, this is my Mandela effect moment, because that Tex Avery, I didn't know who Tex Avery was. And I remember, and I thought it was a Next Generation letter to the editor response, where it was a similar complaint about 3D graphics not looking as good. And them saying something very similar about, you know, this is a new maturing technology. And so my memory of it is that they said something like, so give the technology time because, you know, there haven't been any Michelangelos or even Tex Averys. And I remember being like, what's Tex Avery? And then looking it up and going, the one Looney Tunes guy. Okay, yeah, I remember this guy. I remember those cartoons. And thinking, oh, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I remember thinking of them holding up Tex Avery as this should be achievable soon, you know, cartoony, but unique and standout, right? But that was grouped in with a goal, right? And then here it's a Picasso, Dali, or Escher yet, because we're still working on Michelangelo and Tex Avery, realistic and cartoony. And I'm like, have I completely misremembered this comment? Hey, Ty from the future here. Just wanted to say I was totally making stuff up. I hallucinated this comment as being a Next Generation comment and misunderstood who was talking about who in what context. I cannot find any evidence. I still say that being a Tex Avery is not being lesser than a Pablo Picasso or whatever. Cartoony is still stylistic and interesting, and pure realism and fidelity is not the only goal in and of itself. But of course, 32-bit games at the first generation's launch could have been either more fidelity or more cartoony or any of these other things, and it would have been an improvement. All right, so I didn't give the numbers up ahead of the time because I had this great transition all worked out. I wanted to tell you, Intelligent Gamer, it's a little on the short side. This is July 1996. Again, second issue ever. Only 98 pages of editorial. Only 17 games reviewed, which is 13 two-page reviews and 4 half-page capsules. Only 3 systems reviewed for: PlayStation, Saturn, and PC Windows 95, as they called it. So we're going to see this theme over and over, where they're going deeper on a narrower focus, and you have a much shorter magazine, and less variety than any of its contemporaries, right? So even so, then that means we have a lot to get through. Really interesting. Just flip forward one more page. We get to high-end gaming hits the mainstream. And again, this is all coming out of E3. This is their E3 coverage. There's a ton of stuff here. And check out, Nintendo hosts Super Mario RPG Camp. Just want to read like the first paragraph there.
Yeah. Anxious to educate the press about the subtleties of role-playing games, Nintendo of America recently hosted a press event called Camp RPG, where a group of reporters spent a day at Nintendo playing Super Mario RPG and listening to talks by Nintendo executives.
This is unbelievable. We can't read this whole thing. Almost every paragraph is a pull quote by itself. But they have a Nintendo of America development manager, Dan Ausen, come out and explain RPGs started with pen and paper war games, eventually emerging as Dungeons and Dragons by Gary Gygax. Super Mario RPG is not a pure RPG because of the many action. Going on and on and on and on and on and on. And I am astounded. I keep being astounded, Aidan. How great RPGs were, how big they are in our mind. And I think we understood that they were, a niche interest. A lot of times magazines segregated sometimes magazines segregated RPG reviews entirely. But like the idea that they flew out a bunch of game journalists for a full day conference being like, this is what an RPG is. This is where they come from. Here's Super Mario RPG is astounding to me.
And like, it's interesting. No, I don't want to cross the streams too much with old episodes, but the last episode we were just talking about GameFan, and they were begging for more RPGs in their reviews. Half the review was begging for Nintendo and Sony to put out more RPGs. So you had these two sides of the industry, right? Like Nintendo not necessarily recognizing like how to tap into the journalists who were covering these games and desperate for them,
or just terrified that there weren't any. It seems, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But there's also they give context here, where they say quote unquote, another example is Super Mario RPG. Nintendo sold over 700,000 copies of the game in Japan. By contrast, a Nintendo executive quietly admitted that he will be satisfied if the company sells between 250 and 500,000 copies in the United States. And so those are, even at the time, those are relatively small-ish numbers for a big Nintendo game, where other games or series might be selling in the millions. Dragon Quest VI, for instance, sold 3.5 million copies in Japan. Of course, if you look back at sales data, it seems like pretty much every RPG kind of hit that 500 to 600,000 copies sold. Yeah. Like all of the kind of bigger RPGs, Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, all of those, Super Mario RPG. And that seemed to be the cap of RPG fans, console RPG fans in the United States at that point. Then Final Fantasy VII hit, and it ended up selling, 10 million copies or whatever, which is crazy. There's also another wild quote that just makes me laugh, just below the sales data. And it's from, I'm not sure who this person is, Yoshi Tsuboiki, which is a Nintendo Publications manager, says, in the United States, older players prefer action and sports games, Tsuboiki pointed out. In Japan, it is all right for adults to play fantasy games. I am 38 years old and I play Dragon Quest.
Amazing.
It just makes me feel ancient.
Amazing.
Absolutely ancient.
I love another one here from Gail Tilda, Nintendo Publications Director. According to Tilden, most RPG players need a little help to complete their games. We just finished a survey and found that approximately 80% of RPG enthusiasts subscribe to a Game Enthusiast magazine, and 84% use a player's guide. But the 80% of RPG enthusiasts subscribe to magazines, versus at this time action and sports and shooters and whatever, what percentage of gamers were subscribing to game magazines? I think that tells us a little bit, if that's even close to true, how you and me and RPG players and the common thread of thinking about games and playing games and what we like about games is very telling.
Well, and like I find it very hard when we're going through these not to be drawn to issues. Like when I'm picking out issues for the episodes that I write scripts for, I'm always like drawn to the ones with RPGs, and I think that like we were also seeing like within Game Fan, and obviously the guys at Game Players, like the staff there, were big fans of RPGs. Like I do think that there was probably, and it's supported by these statistics here, that a higher average number of RPG fans subscribe to magazines. But then like, isn't that like Nintendo? I feel like the answer's right there, guys. Like, pour more money into like these games that get an inordinate number of eyes on magazines, and you guys should be able to start selling more of them. Well, which again, like then Square went, oh yeah, right, we'll spend $40 million, and then Final Fantasy VII did what it did, right? And so like, the answer was kind of there. Just like advertise these games, bet on them, and it worked out pretty well for Square.
It sure did. And in fact, one box over, the next thing I was going to point out, Square changes incentives. Square, developer of the wildly popular Final Fantasy series, basically profit sharing, has announced Japanese teams will be paid according to how well their games do in the marketplace. A designer who creates a game that sells over 3 million units will be paid with an annual income of 100 million yen, which is roughly $1 million. There are 20 in-house development teams, each staffed with 30 to 150 people. And like, this is, there's no sourcing for this report or any of these numbers, and it's not in sync with my understanding of where things were at the time. Squaresoft has 20 in-house development teams, each staffed with 30 to 150 people in 1996. Is that true? That doesn't sound right to me. That sounds huge. I remember hearing there was like over 100 people working on Final Fantasy VII, which is not out yet. There's although those on the Final Fantasy team are almost assured of making some pretty healthy bonuses. So Final Fantasy VII is coming. They have a screenshot of the ancient temple here. Like, this just seems wild to me, and I've never heard this before, and I don't know if there's any follow up to this since.
I mean, I've never seen anything relating to profit sharing at Square, like when I was researching my book about RPGs.
Page 16, though, I wanted to jump ahead a couple more. Hot top 10. We don't need to run down the whole list of top 10, but they have a top 10 for current release, top 10 arcade games, and then editors most wanted.
Okay, hold tight. I did find, this is Wikipedia, but it's sourced from Matt Leone's Oral History of Final Fantasy VII.
Okay.
Development of the final version took staff of between 100 and 150 people, just over a year to complete, as video game development teams were usually only about 20 people at the time. The game had what was described as the largest development team of any game up to that point.
That's what I remember, is that this was 100 to 150 people.
150
and
would be like exceptional. Yeah.
Huge team at the time. So, okay. I remain skeptical of this report. Thank you, though. Let's look at this hot top 10. This is really interesting because they have current release top 10, no source. Arcade games top 10, courtesy of Replay Magazine, May 1996, and then editors most wanted. And so is this they also the 1996 E3 show top 10. So it's like this is just the editors' opinions for all of these categories except arcade games, which comes courtesy of Replay Magazine, which makes you think it's some sort of like sales or play rate, like what's getting the most quarters right now. Really, really strange. And then we end up with editors most wanted. Okay, number 1, Super Mario 64, sure. 2, Tetrasphere for Nintendo 64.
That's like, it's supposed to be sphere, like SPHERE, but it's spelled Tetris and then capital Phear.
So it's a sphere that you're afraid of because it's Tetris. And then it's like Knights, Wipeout XL, Piloting 6-Step, the Dark Savior, I guess. Number 8, Final Fantasy 7. All right. Okay. Very weird for a magazine that otherwise is like super Japan focused and you know, intelligent gamer and like really wanting all this you know, stuff. It's just really strange to me because I bet by the time Final Fantasy 7 actually comes out and they get their hands on it, it's going to be a little bit higher up the list. Go forward super quick, if you don't mind, to page 20. Big, huge, almost entirely text. Whole wall of text on the 3DO M2. Next generation around the same time.
Whoa. I gotta stop you.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about this controller.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, we are.
Like... How did that make it out of like any sort of meeting? So okay,
yeah.
Sorry, carry on. But,
no,
wow.
Yeah, this was 3DO M2. There was a bunch of press around it. I think it was people were expecting a physical unit at this E3, and it didn't happen. Next Gen, right about at this time, I know had a whole issue, you know, cover story feature interview with Trip Hawkins on the 3DO M2. Spoiler alert, it never came out. It never happened. This graphic that they released of the controller is basically, you know, a Sega Genesis 6-button controller, 2 like ovals or circles kind of merged, shoulder buttons, D-pad, 6, you know, ABC, XYZ face buttons. In the middle, there's what appears to be an N64 style analog stick and a start select. And just the middle prong of where you would consider an N64 controller to be. Note that there is no left or right prong. So you have 2 circles with a big, long prong coming out from between them. No pun intended in the use of the word coming there.
What Ty's trying to say is it looks like a dick with some big balls.
Looks like a
and then
dick with some big balls.
The analog stick and the start and select buttons look like a face. It looks like a dick with a face.
It's
amazing. It's like it had to have been a joke that somehow slipped through.
Yeah,
hey?
I would think this physical thing never existed. As
like
far as
the bottom of the joy, like the handle, like the middle, like handle on a Nintendo 64 controller. Like this one, it's like it's like
circumcised. Like it's like
like I do not believe that there's no way this wasn't a joke that somehow got like slipped through quality control or like PR.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Incredible.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. I kind of love it.
Yeah. I'm reminded of, did you ever see the old story about the Nokia N-Gage being goatsy?
Oh. Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that too. That's great.
The designer, like, because they were trying to get this through, and somebody wrote this big blog post who, you know, claimed to be the designer, and people, you know, backed it up or whatever. But was basically like, we were on like design 40 or 41, and every single design kept getting rejected. And I finally, you know, I was just so mad. I went, okay, cool. And I just made Goatsy a video game handheld unit. And like the fingers are there, and there's even like the ring. There's like a start button where like the ring would be in the original Goatsy picture.
Oh my gosh!
Then they went, yeah, actually, no, that's great, and approved it.
Never. Holy smokes! You're blowing my mind here, Ty.
I was absolutely astonished.
This is not going to make sense to anybody under the like a certain age, but this is like the most millennial, like mind blowing, like terminally online millennial moment ever. Holy smokes.
You're looking at the slide right now if you're watching on YouTube, and if not, there'll be. I'll put it in the show notes. Real quick, I'm actually going to skip over most of what the meat of this issue is, which is the E3 coverage of Nintendo 64. Got like I said, it's like page 22. Oh, the new console war, and they're talking. You know, obviously they're super excited about getting their hands on Pilot Wings, Mario. We see Knights. There's a great $199 Saturn and $199 modem. Obviously, That did not happen. Sonic Extreme, very famously, this game was shown at E3 and was one of several completely failed attempts to translate Sonic into 3D and put it on the Saturn. There's even a little sidebar here called No Shows. Most of Sega's arcade games, Daytona USA CC Edition, Virtua Fighter 3, Sacred Pools, a bunch of games that they were expecting to see at E3 that did not arrive. I'm going to keep flipping past the E3 stuff. And now we're going to get to what I kind of alluded to. Page 38 here, Akihabara, the Electric Town. And this, I remember references to Akihabara in other magazines, right? But this was like an actual kind of like on the ground guide to, okay, if you come here, this is the famous video game district, what can you expect? And it's like a 2-page feature. And again, this is all done very much with a like, on the ground. There's original photos, there's original reporting. Again, it's credited to Akira Kishimoto. And it's just it's really interesting. We also immediately to the right here have this ad for Shining Wisdom for Sega Saturn with like just the most 90s anime ass art.
It's for it's so good. It's for
Shining Wisdom.
Beautiful.
Yeah, like that's not Papyrus font, but that's like that one Papyrus adjacent font here. Win $10,000. I guess if you pre-order something with EGA, 10,000 frames of SGI animation.
It's the most working designs ad you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
Like, it's good though. It's like I really like the art. It's like watercolor, which was kind of unusual to see in magazines at this time. It wasn't really like the style that you would see for art.
Yeah, and the I remember the suit of armor too being like it almost looks like Mega Man armor, and it's like
kind of like robotic almost. Yeah, in its proportions and stuff. Yeah,
it's very cool. That said, of course, we also have an elf princess who apparently has nothing better to do with her time than stand behind the very, very brave 14-year-old in his robot shiny armor and wear a low-cut bodice for his and our enjoyment, I guess. But anyway, get to the previews here, page 46. And again, this just screams Next Generation to me, including like the color bars on the left-hand side with the publisher, platform, developer. And of course, I didn't know at the time that Next Generation was also significantly just Edge from the UK at the same time. That was literally the same people or many of the same people creating this content. Preview for Command and Conquer Red Alert, which just got, I hear, a very nice remaster that I'm super interested in playing.
Fantastic game. We played a lot of Red Alert back in the day.
Me too.
Had a lot of fun.
Me too.
With that one.
So that one's very cool. Hyperblade. I remember loving the previews that I saw of this. It's like extreme sports.
Really?
I don't even know if this came out.
This is like everything I hated about 3D, like polygon video games.
Well, I wanted it to be what it wasn't yet.
Right.
I can't remember.
I mean, what it is it looks like a bunch of like ketchup and mustard, like falling down a drain or something.
It looks like, because they've sacrificed
it
textures for speed is what's happening here, right? They can't make they can't make it smooth enough. They can't make it fast enough. So there's just no textures. It's just polygons. Yeah. So no, it's I understand. I understand the critique, right? And it's like I think it was Pete Townsend from The Who was talking about Peter Frampton being obsessed with like MIDI and synths in the 70s and being like, oh, come on, guys, let's play along with the computer. And all the band members being like, dude, this is not what you want it to be. We cannot play along with the computer. The computer cannot do what you want it to do. It does not sound good. Knock it off. And like, that's exactly what we have here. Dungeon Keeper, as much as I want to look at it, looks super cool and talk about it. I want to flip past because we've got limited time. Here's Legend of Oasis, which we talked before about in our last episode with Game Fan.
Looking beautiful.
It looks gorgeous. It looks great. Dragon Force. I didn't another Working Designs one. This is the one that we just saw the ad for. Or no, that was Shining Wisdom. Right. So here's another Working Designs one.
Wisdom,
and you can put just like a ton RPG battles with like dozens of mobs on screen at a time. Very cool.
Yeah. Dragon Force was one of those games that I thought looked so cool, but I didn't have a Saturn.
Right.
And it just did so many interesting, impressive things, and it still does. Like, I think it's still absolutely a game worth going back and exploring if you want to see, like, you know, some interesting things that were happening in the mid-90s.
Get to page 64 with capsule previews, and these are half-page previews. Crash Bandicoot, Star Gladiator, and that's just 2 capsule previews. Not sure why all these others were 1-page previews. We have 2 half-page previews, whatever. And then we get into the reviews section. So lots to talk about here in Intelligent Gamer and how they approached reviews. But first, we have to take a break and get a chance to hear about your reviews of our reviews in the letters section. When we come back, we'll review Intelligent Gamer's review of Jumping Flash 2 right here on FunFactor. All right, it's time for our favorite section, the letters section, where we read the best, funniest, kindest, and most fun-factory Apple Podcast reviews, YouTube comments, and kind notes that you folks drop us live on the air. Use some more if you feel kind enough. If you feel like giving us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, please go leave a rating, leave a review, tell people why you like, you love, you want to keep listening to FunFactor, because we want to do it for you. Aidan, why don't you go ahead and read Tempest's amazing 5-star Apple Podcast review?
Yeah, so from Tempest, who's one of our favorite Discord members, super active in the FunFactor community. Tempest says in a review titled Turn-Based Sports, FunFactor is my return to the love of the written word, my sanctuary away from repeated YouTube video reviews with a wide-mouthed face aligned to the right or left of the thumbnail. The review of reviews in the magazine give insight into the time and art of writing for games. Introspection from the hosts connects the then to the now, placing history into modern context.
Thank you so much, Tempest. We really appreciate that. And we really appreciate you and your partner being so active on the Discord. It helps keep the FunFactor community fresh and active and fun. We also really appreciate Jason WFD on YouTube. Your comments are great. This one on the EGM Doom episode. Neither Aidan nor I remember actually saying this or how we said it, but it makes sense. So I don't know why, but why I'm Sushi X. I'm radical. Absolutely. Sent me cry laughing emoji. Keep up the great work, folks. Absolutely love what you're doing here. We absolutely love you commenting on our YouTube videos. Again, it helps us get engagement, helps spread the word. Aidan, why don't you read the next Apple Podcast review? 5 stars from JP Snow 85.
Let's wrap this up with JP Snow's review, A Love Letter to Games Media of Yesteryear. What a fantastic concept, brilliantly executed by Ty and Aidan. Whether the game catches your attention or the magazine being spotlighted, it's a delightful trip in the Wayback Machine for the Zennial crowd and older Gen Z, as well as providing some fascinating insight on the evolution of games media for younger audiences. Makes a great accompaniment to my... Makes a great accompaniment... That's a hard word. Makes a great accompaniment... Makes a great accompaniment on my commute to work, and I highly recommend it to any folks looking for more gaming-themed podcasts to add to their rotation. Thank you so much, JP Snow 85. If you want to get your review read on air, remember, mention that Aidan's your favorite host, and do not use the word accompaniment in your review, and your odds will go up dramatically.
Yeah, I'll just say some of us had piano teacher stepmothers and others of us did not, and it shows. Okay, it shows. But hey, whether you can say the word accompaniment on demand or not, stick with us through the break. We will come back and review Intelligent Gamer number 2's review of Jumping Flash 2 here on FunFactor, a podcast whose name does not rhyme with the word two. All right, we are having 5 out of 5 stars worth of fun today. As always, if you are to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we will read the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining ones on the air. Let's just see how intelligent this review of Jumping Flash 2 is. Very interesting setup here because Intelligent Gamer used a letter grade system for graphics, sounds, gameplay, lasting power, and then an overall grade. It doesn't look like the grades directly influence each other, like the overall grade. I don't know if it's an average. If it is, they don't say so. Like a lot of other magazines, there's a 1 to 3 plus or minus bullet points in each category. A's and A minuses were highly recommended. B's were recommended. C pluses and C's were average. C minuses were below average. There isn't a D or below in this issue. I looked up a couple others and didn't get a D. I don't know how often they gave D or below or F. So I don't have the actual grade. But then again, like other magazines, there's also a bottom line 1 or 2 sentence takeaway for the whole thing. But, you know, for as much as this game seemed to be aping, to me, Next Generation and being like, this is Ziff-Davis's Next Generation, right? Next Generation had very concise reviews. You know, usually a couple hundred words, at most a half page, 1 or 2 screenshots tops, and then a 5-letter system. This is a huge 2-page spread with a bunch of smaller screenshots, a couple big, varying sizes with captions, tons of words, very small font. There's captions, there's pull quotes, there's sidebars. This is over 1,500 words of a review lavished onto our game for the day, Jumping Flash 2. That's really cool. Again, smaller focus though, they only review 13 games. Their capsule reviews, which they literally call capsule reviews. If you flip ahead to page 88, their 4 literally titled capsule reviews are still a half page each on 2 pages, which is still longer than most next gen reviews. Like those are like their big featured reviews, or like the 300, 400 word half page reviews. So they really went deep on these reviews, really went in depth. But like Next Generation, we don't have a byline. We don't have who actually wrote this review. So there's a lot of contradictory and interesting things there. But first, Aidan, what's your history with Jumping Flash 2? And if not 2, then the series.
Yeah, I didn't play a lot of Jumping Flash 2, but I played a lot of the original Jumping Flash. And as one of the early PlayStation games, again, I've brought this up a few times. I didn't get a PlayStation until Final Fantasy 7 came out, but my friend had a PlayStation and he had a lot of these early games. And we played the heck out of Jumping Flash. And it was one of those 3D games where, as much as I kind of dog on early 3D games because I don't really care for the visuals, some games like Super Mario 64 obviously showcased a future that was worth getting excited about. And I love Super Mario 64. I don't think I love Jumping Flash, but it was another game that showed me that 3D could do stuff that 2D couldn't. And so just the verticality of these levels and the way you jumped up and kind of looked down at your feet as you were launching, 150 feet in the air was something that I had never seen in a game before. And so it made me think about game worlds and 3D space in a way that was interesting and was different than what Super Mario 64 was doing. Wasn't a classic, it didn't create genres and set precedents for video games going forward, but it at least allayed a bit of my frustrations with the shift to 3D graphics for a lot of these consoles.
See, I did have a PlayStation early, and I did have Jumping Flash, and I loved it. I thought it was really, really cool. And it was maybe compelling as much in terms of this combination of the much derided word cute. I was like, hey, here's a company who's not Nintendo giving us charming, colorful visuals that are still compelling. And, again, pre-Super Mario 64, this is about as good as it got in that vein at this time, right?
And
go ahead.
Sony was really heavily leaning into PlayStation's for older gamers.
Yes.
You're not a kid anymore and these games aren't for kids. So Jumping Flash did stand out that way. It also felt to me very Japanesey. Sure. Without me really realizing or understanding at the time that's what it was. And that felt, fun and interesting as well. It was it was a fun game to spend time with because of how different it felt.
Yeah, and technically a first-person shooter. Oh, but actually it's a platformer, and it's 3D, and it's jumping, and the camera worked great. The ability to look up and down, the ability to double jump, or hit like jump pads or catch updrafts in Jumping Flash 2. You could get really, really high up and look down and see the draw distance and the fog coming, like, wow, and then look down between your feet. I remember getting it for Christmas this year, 1990, or well, it would have been 1995 for the Jumping Flash 1, and showing my grandma, and her looking at the TV, and I'm trying to explain, see, like, these are your feet, that's the see, you're looking into, and like, she could not get the first person perspective concept. Like, she didn't physically understand what she was looking at, and that was funny. But as much as I loved Jumping Flash, there's a ton of personality, everything, it was a huge quantum leap for Jumping Flash 2 for me, which came out 1 year later. And it's wild. I didn't realize it's like exactly 1 year later. Jumping Flash 1 released April 28th, 1995 in Japan, and the US on November 2nd. Jumping Flash 2 was like April 26th, 1995 in Japan, and November 1st in the US in 1986. So
wild.
Like, that's wild to think about this turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, as we wait years and years for sequels, that time was quite a astounding time for video games, sequels and series and stuff.
Yeah, and as I looked it up a little bit, they just took the same engine and mechanics. I went, okay, this works.
It's almost like a level pack.
Let's just update the graphics. And you can see in Jumping Flash 2, the draw distance is way farther. There's way more detail. There's a lot more mechanics and stuff to get you higher. There's different physics. There's like fans that kind of blow you around and springs. And, there's a lot more advanced stuff happening there. It all just looks really amazing. The full title in the US, I am physically incapable of saying without mimicking the narrator. Jumping Flash 2! Big Trouble in Little Moo! And in Japan, that was Jumping Flash 2, The Tale of the Greatly Troubled Baron Aloha. And, we've talked about, do we revisit games? I revisited over the last, 10, 15 years. I've done a lot more revisiting of games I played and go back and beat them. Games that I owned and wanted to get, or sequels to games that I didn't have, like I played the original, wanted to get the sequel, that kind of stuff. And Jumping Flash, I remember 1 and 2 like blurrily in my mind because they were similar and they had a lot of the same things, but like the cutscenes in 2, there's all these pre-rendered cutscenes. A lot of this game's story is being told, again, very charming. And the bad guy from the first one returns in the second. But then there's a twist, and it turns out, the bad guy is getting controlled by an even worse bad guy, Captain Kabuki. Which,
you mean the Final Fantasy series plot?
Yes,
every game?
Exactly. So, now we got to team up with the bad guy to defeat Captain Suzuki, which is actually Captain Kabuki. I don't know why it's captioned Captain Suzuki in Intelligent Gamer here. It's definitely Captain Kabuki. Very weird. But so we have like cutscenes of the Moo-Moos, Baron Aloha's minions, like getting drunk in bars, being like, oh my gosh, we have to face Robert again. Like, why won't he leave us alone? There's all sorts of this stuff that we just didn't, that was actually cut from the first game. And then not only are those scenes present again in Jumping Flash 2, they also included Jumping Flash 1 with the original cutscenes in Jumping Flash 2. So one of the reasons it's blurry in my mind is that I played and beat Jumping Flash 1. I played that a bunch. But then when I got 2, I played 2 and 1, and I saw all the cutscenes. So in my mind, I remembered 1 having cutscenes, even though it didn't originally in its US release.
It's an interesting approach, especially for a game that comes out so close together. Like, you might have had people who are worried about playing Jumping Flash 2 without having played the first one, and you can kind of hand that to them and be like, nah, just play this. Gameplay's better. You get the story from the first one, you're good to go.
And it also, I think, shows we're starting to get into this era of Japanese companies being aware of Western markets and how maybe the difference between Western and Eastern is not that great. That maybe North American gamers and European gamers will buy and enjoy this stuff that they think of as, well, only we like this stuff. However, Intelligent Gamer, again, 1,500 words. I can't have you read all of it. I have a little piece here, if you don't mind reading, because I think they fell victim to their own critique here a little bit.
Like some of the other launch titles, though, Jumping Flash was victimized by the media in that it was impossible for this fabulous new experience to live up to the hype that was created prior to the game's release. Nonetheless, its inclusion on the sampler disc and endless rantings by some of the same people who panned phenomenal games like Yoshi's Island ensured the game's quick success as one of the first-generation titles on the new platform. Only a year later, the sequel lacks one of the key factors that pushed the original game to such heightened popularity: novelty.
So this review then goes on to spend the next longer than many game reviews were at the time, repeatedly bashing it for being the same as the first game but better. Which, okay, I guess, as an artistic, critique, but we're talking about a direct follow-up a year later where that's all most people wanted from video game sequels. Give me the same thing with better graphics, better sound, new story, and like that. That's exactly what's delivered here.
Yeah. I mean, like some of the greatest sequels of all time came out in this time period, and I'm thinking of stuff like Doom 2.
Yeah.
Which is just Doom with a shotgun and a bunch of brilliant levels, right? Or you have Street Fighter 2 and Turbo and like all of those games, right? Which are iterations on a formula that already worked. And so that was kind of the thing at that point. Even on the PC, you were looking at stuff like Baldur's Gate or Diablo 2. Like Diablo 2 Diablo 2 is not a great example because it really did blow up the scope of Diablo 1. But the point being that we weren't seeing wholesale like reinvention, especially when the games came out a year apart, and people were used to like expansion packs that gave just more of an already great experience. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing here with Jumping Flash. Like, improve things around the fringes, polish stuff up, and let's go. Especially because it probably, I remember my friend had the game, but that demo disc they're talking about, that's how I mostly played Jumping Flash. Like, even after I got my PlayStation in 97, I played that demo so much because novelty doesn't go away the first time you experience something like that. It continues to feel, it continues to feel good. There's still no other game like Jumping Flash. Actually, I think there might have been an indie, like, Jumping Flash inspired game that came out recently or is coming out. But there's more or less, like, Jumping Flash still feels novel. And Jumping Flash 2 still feels novel because it wasn't Super Mario 64, which can feel derivative to new players who play it and are like, oh, well, what's so special about this? It feels like every other 3D platformer. And it's like, well, yeah, because every other 3D platformer cribbed from it. Whereas Jumping Flash, there's two of them. And that's it.
Yeah.
And, novelty is an interesting thing to sort of like dog on without being able to contextualize what comes afterwards. But I also do like, I actually like that perspective of like critiquing and turning a lens on the media, and how they kind of, use their platform maybe to, what did it say? Pan phenomenal games like Yoshi's Island. Like when we talked about the Game Players issue with Yoshi's Island, like I was critical of their take on Yoshi's Island because it's a classic game. But they say it looks like a game for 5-year-olds and it looks like a first gen Super Nintendo game or something like insane like that. And they gave it a 5 out of 10 on graphics. And it's like, I know there's a subjectivity in games criticism, and there should be, and we talk about why that's important. But at the same time, like, you need to, there was also that feeling of that hype cycle. And we talked earlier in this episode, like 3D was pushed because they, companies wanted to sell new hardware and they wanted to sell new development tools to developers and stuff like that. And you could kind of feel that like there was a push away from games like Yoshi's Island towards stuff like hyping up Jumping Flash. And in hindsight, how much of that was sort of like games media buying into the hype cycle of these new generations and how much was like, more like like criticism for criticism's sake and like contextualizing and placing these within context of other games at the time and what games were trying to do, what technology did, how technology evolves and matures, rather than being like, oh, this game's no good because it's not 3D, which happened a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get the sense ultimately, I think, that this game is not the reviewer's cup of tea, even though they praise it quite extensively for what it does well. They're kind of like, hey, my colleagues, you guys went nuts for this and hyped it up as like super cool, but like it's short and it does kind of the same thing over and over, and I didn't like it that much. And now here we are, and I was hoping to get something that evolved the concept more, and instead we have more of the same. Even if I don't agree with the reviewer, I think it's well put, and I think it's a fairly advanced argument. But I still want you to read this next bit. I just dropped it into the doc here. As long and also Intelligent Gamer, I think we have a little bit of we're leaning on 10-cent words a little bit to kind of, spice up how intelligent we are. But go ahead.
These graphical enhancements underlie the backbone of improvements in Jumping Flash 2. Nearly every object or concept created for the first game appears in the sequel, but in flashier form. The roller coaster that Robert could ride to reach different parts of a level in the old game is present in the new game too, but this time water slides and rainbows accompany the coaster tracks, which are lined with colored light and give a more realistic sense of motion reminiscent of the racing game Wipeout. Even the details one would so often take for granted were enhanced. The sky is more rich and flowing, the shadows are more realistically placed, and the ground texture seems less repetitive. In every way, the small island levels are packed with the graphic intensity that make it one of the most beautiful games yet to offer a three-dimensional playfield. If the effortless snow and rain aren't convincing enough, one special effect seems to never get old. Again, like the first game, small mazes appear here and there throughout the levels where players can explore, but this time, the mazes are found underwater. As breathtaking as in the movie The Abyss, this one effect is easily the most incredible experience in the entire game.
Okay, so I feel like if a direct sequel a year later takes every single object and concept created for the first game and brings it back in flashier, better form, and achieves some of this stuff, you're like, the motion looks like Wipeout, the water effects look like The Abyss. This is very, very, very high praise for a game that you spend 800 to 900 words trashing for its unoriginality.
Yeah. And I think like something that's really hard about criticism is recognizing how to look at and communicate about something like a video game or a book or a film or music and say, this is why this wasn't what I wanted versus this is why this doesn't succeed at what it wanted. And I think this whole review here spends a lot of time reconciling like, hey, I didn't love the first one and this one didn't change my mind about that.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, hey, this is what the first one wanted to do. This is why it was effective. And now the second one improves upon that, or it takes something that I didn't really love, but, made things better. But ultimately, I think that's reflected in the score. Like a B+ is a pretty good score. And I think the overall tone and tenor of the review is like, hey, I feel like this should have been more. I feel like the concept for this game or the execution could be so much more. I wish it was something bigger or more suited to my taste, but and landing on a B+ and saying basically like, hey, if you like Jumping Flash, this is Jumping Flash, but more is an okay place kind of to land. But how different would it have been if they had assigned it to a different reviewer who kind of grokked a little bit more with what the original Jumping Flash wanted to do?
The one really, really substantive critique they hit is how short the game is and how easy it is. How, all the bosses can kind of be beaten the same way. There's a gimmick halfway through, again, where you switch who the bad guy is and there's more levels and you kind of got to beat him again plus a bonus level, right? You got to play all the way through faster. You have less time to complete it. But it's still not that hard, right? And so, but they give it still a B- for lasting power, which if you're saying this game is only 6 to 10 hours at a time when replay value and game length was something that people were desperate for how expensive games were, right? It's kind of weird to me. And then the bullet points, the graphics and atmosphere make the game worth exploring fully. That's positive. Minus, this process of exploration won't take too long, though, and no 2-player options are included. So, like, if that's your biggest hammer you're hitting and it's a B-, everything else is graphics A, sounds A minus, gameplay B plus. That lasting power kind of has to be. I feel like that should be like a C or D to drag the whole score down to a B plus, right? You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. It is, yeah, how they weight these things, or if they even weight them at all, is always interesting. But I mean, like, considering too, they don't break down their scale, but a B plus is still recommended too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, like, so B minus isn't that far off from a B plus that's recommended, and so I think we also have to recognize that, like, in this scale, a B plus is probably still a pretty good score. A B minus is still like middle of the road or slightly above score. If they're using that full scale.
Yeah, and you flip one page, victory goal 96 gets an A, highly recommended. And I feel like history is kinder to Jumping Flash and Jumping Flash 2 than victory goal 96. I think I remember like one or two stills from this from another magazine, but Jumping Flash, if you were alive at the time or have done any kind of retro gaming, Jumping Flash. It's a big game. It was a big hit.
What's interesting though? The review before was Space Hulk, which also got a B plus, which I think is interesting because it's another game that I think is like, I'm very memorable for me, even if I haven't ever played it. And it's, is it good? Like, yeah, it's probably fine. But a B plus kind of putting in that category of like interesting, recommended. It's an experience you should check out, but don't mortgage your house to buy it. But something else like we haven't touched on in this review is there is in the bottom left corner, so which is a strange place to put like a wrap up line type blurb. It says the sequel to Jumping Flash makes a graphical leap from the original game without altering gameplay enough to lose the small captured audience, nor to become more attractive to those who had skipped over the first one. As such, Jumping Flash 2 is highly recommended to fans of its prequel and moderately recommended to fans of platform games in general. And I think that's kind of an interesting distinction to make because I think the reviewer here, the unnamed reviewer, probably falls into the second category. Likes platform games, wanted this to be more, and that's a moderately recommended. But if you really liked what the original Jumping Flash was doing, this is highly recommended. And so it's kind of sliding in the, just right down the middle with that B plus recommended average. And I think there's kind of room because there's so much space here. There's room for a bit of nuance or identifying like, hey, if these things sound kind of like bothersome or not worth the money, you're probably going to be disappointed in the game. If this stuff doesn't bother you because you just want more Jumping Flash, like go for it. You're going to love it.
And because I do and did like and love Jumping Flash, that comes off as a little harsh to me. My teen self is going,
yeah.
What other I'm a PlayStation owner who's a big platforming fan. Jumping Flash 2, I don't know if I'm gonna bother. Like what other 3D platformers are you buying that are so much better than Jumping Flash 2, right? Like what other options do you have? Like me and my RPG thing, where in the last episode we were saying Lufia 2. I was busy playing Beyond the Beyond and hating it. Like there weren't too many other RPGs out there, but I was playing every single one for PlayStation because I was like, come on, give me the big glorious 32-bit RPG. Give me Chrono Trigger, but we have a CD worth of space and, more colors and more pixels. Like, let's see it, and I wanted every game to be that. If I'm a platform fan and I have a PlayStation, to me, there's no way I'm not buying Jumping Flash 2 if I can afford it, and there's no way I'm not having a good time with it if I do. But Aidan, where do you come down on this review of Jumping Flash 2?
I actually think it's pretty good. As somebody who was a big fan of the first game, not too much experience with the second game, I think that there's enough space here that it's able to sort of air its grievances without overweighting them to like drag down the entire review and make it into a negative review. Like as somebody with no emotional attachment to this game, I get and understand that they're saying, hey, if you like Jumping Flash, this is more Jumping Flash, go for it. If you're new to the series or you just like platformers or you're lukewarm on the first game, just be cautious. I think that's pretty good. I'm actually quite impressed by the quality of the writing here and how it it spends too much time saying, this game is the exact same as your first game. I wish it would say that once or twice at the beginning and then get into what's kind of interesting or, about this game against not Jumping Flash 1, but other, like you're saying, other, 3D platformers or action games or adventure games at the time, rather than continually going back to the well with the first game. And so I think there's some missed opportunity there to do that. I'd probably put this at probably about a 7. It's a pretty good review. But I don't think it really necessarily teaches me anything new about the game. I think it does its purpose of trying to write sort of a review that recognizes the game's pretty good, even if it didn't work for the critic, which can be a tough thing to do.
Well, I am going to give it 9 out of 10 root beer fizzies, and I'm going to explain. Because as much as I dogged them,
I don't know what a root beer fizzy is.
Exactly. I dogged the reviewer for digging too much into Jumping Flash 1 and its similarities, and the fact that I can tell palpably, this reviewer was disappointed by Jumping Flash 1, didn't feel it lived up to the hype, thought it had a lot of promise, thought it was way too short. Okay, was hoping Jumping Flash 2 would fix some of those, didn't, but instead just really expanded on its original strengths. The fact that they came down and gave it a B+, recommended, explained, how. And again, part of it is just the editorial decision to go, we're going to give this 1,600 words. We're going to give every game that we review the space, and the reviewer the space, to maybe include a little bit of historical context and and explain, bringing this baggage to the review, right? Because in any other magazine, we don't get those first 800 words. We might not get those first 1,000 words. Right? And so that gives me the key to unlock it and go, okay, seeing through all that, as a big fan of the first game, I'm going to freaking love Jumping Flash 2.
Okay, 2 things that, what you were saying just kind of stuck out to me. I think I need to go a little higher on my review of this review, because I think that one thing that's sort of interesting is I think I've been sort of looking at this review and reading this review, because it's long, because it's more complex, through sort of a modern lens. And True. As a modern review, I'd probably give it something like a 7 out of 10. When I contextualize this against other 1996 reviews, this is a phenomenal piece of in-depth criticism of a game that you didn't get at length in other similar magazines outside of Next Gen or whatever. And that part of it is pretty impressive. The second part was that I think what you were saying about the length allowing them to have a little bit more of that own experience or voice or subjectivity in here is really smart, is really sharp. There's a lot of personality in this review, but because they don't have a byline,
good point,
doesn't hit very well for me. I think you need one or the other. I think you sort of need institutional, not objective criticism, but I think if you're writing from an institutional voice without bylines, having that personality driven writing come in is a really hard sell, because I need to know what other games this guy likes, or this he or she likes, to be able to tell whether this is going to be close to my reaction or not. And at a time when other games were leaning into that, and I'd say, I really like all the games that so-and-so likes. Jeff Lundgren from Game Players loves the same games as me. Chris Slate likes the same games as me. If he likes this, I'm going to like it. That falls apart when you don't have those bylines. And so I think that's maybe why this review is feeling a little conflicted for me. I feel like it's really impressive in its depth, but at the same time, it's just missing that element of okay, now I can take this opinion, weigh it against this person's other writing, and understand how it matches up with my own personal experiences.
Yeah, well, and I definitely want to know more. I do want to know who wrote this review, and I'm very curious to continue to look back at Intelligent Gamer, that I did not give it a chance back in the day because I thought I was being pandered to, which exposes exactly how immature I was at the time. And I want to explain Root Beer Fizzies. That is what they called the brown liquor the Moo-Moos were very clearly drinking at the Japanese bars that they were very clearly inhabiting. Because as much as we were now getting more and more of the original Japanese market flavor, apparently Sonny was still making sure that we didn't know that the Moo-Moos were drinking themselves blind at the idea of having to fight Robbit again. Instead, it said, "Bring me another root beer fizzy." And a friend of mine and I ended up having a whole thing where there were these root beer fizzies that were like Alka-Seltzers. You could like drop them into water and it would fizz and turn brown. And so it was this whole thing with Jumping Flash 2. So anyway, I love Jumping Flash. I love Jumping Flash 2. I really appreciate this review. Even if I disagree with the reviewer, do you guys agree out there in listener land? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on YouTube. We will read the best ones on air. And go ahead, pass this show around to all your friends like it's third grade and we're on the playground. Shout us out on Blue Sky, X, YouTube at FunFactor Pod. Special thanks to Millennium Falck for all our amazing original music. Check out his work and his incredible Windows 95 styled website at millenniumfalck.com. It's millenniumfalck.com. And hey, unlike the old magazines we review, you won't have to wait a whole month for your next installment. We are dropping episodes every 2 weeks. So go to funfactorpod.com to follow our show on your podcatcher of choice. And please consider becoming a member of Fun Factor Ultra, our premium tiers that unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and the members-only channel of our Discord. Just go to funfactorpod.com, and I promise you will not miss the sign-up widget on our homepage. If you do, you and we will have a maximum score in Fun Factor.
20 in-house development teams, each staffed at 30 to 150 people. I mean, even on the low end, that would put you at 600 staff at Square in 1996. I can't remember how many were working on Final Fantasy VII, but
does that sound seems, big to you? That sounds like big to me.
Yeah, especially because at that time, like, their games hadn't like blown up worldwide. Like, they were selling a lot in Japan, but they weren't selling a lot outside of Japan. This was pre-Enix merger, so they didn't have that Dragon Quest money.
And this is and they weren't really doing the thing now where, you know, they publish a lot of third-party developed titles, as far as I know. Yeah. Like Squaresoft, they were making their own RPGs and a handful of other genres, and that's it. So they're not releasing 20 games a year, right? This just seems like a wild combination of claims to me.
Well, without sourcing, it feels like hard to really rely on any sort of data like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do a quick little look at what the staff size was on Final Fantasy VII, but at the same time, I don't think that this Ziff-Davis magazine would make up a bunch of very specific data points like that. Like, it was one thing when they would like make up rumors in EGM and like publish them under Sushi X's name or whatever. But like, I don't think that they would write a whole sidebar based off information or data that they just like completely made up. I don't think.
Yeah, that would surprise me too. So maybe behind the scenes, they're sourcing. They thought that was valid. Definitely keep me posted if you get to the numbers. Or is this a recycled? I was looking through the letters section of old Next Gens, trying to be like, did I hallucinate this? Is it a different magazine that I read? Because I did not know Tex Avery before reading that magazine comment, and now I'm looking at this and going, is this just, am I hallucinating, or did they just rip off basically a letter to the editor answer from a different magazine?
Or did editorial staff move from one to the other so that you kind of have that, that same opinion, or maybe, maybe it all spawns from some, E3 barroom conversation one night as well, right? Like, the industry was very small. And so maybe that's just, there's touch points that people were using from similar sources or the exact same source at some point.